Hello everyone. The US elections are right around the corner, and it's one of the elections that has a really great impact on where the world politics is headed. We at Wokelok had a really great opportunity to interview Dr. Allison Campolo. She's a doctor of infectious diseases as well as a democratic politician from the state of Oklahoma. We are bringing this interview to you so that you can understand the US political scenario a bit better, the key issues in the election, the status of the election, and the impact that it will have all over the world. So, do follow Wokelok, like the video, and enjoy.
Thanks for tuning in. We have with us Dr. Allison Campolo. She's a biomedical researcher, she's a senior scientist. She's working with infectious disease research and development wing. Also, the most important thing and the reason why she is with us today is she's a political commentator. She's a Democrat. To give you a little background about her, she ran for Texas State Senate primary in 2018, and then she ended up running for Tarrant County Democratic campaign. And then in 2019, she took a very good initiative. She founded Tarrant Together, which is a voter registration PAC to encourage people to vote basically and to increase participation in democracy. So welcome, Alison.
Thank you. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for giving us time. It's a big day tomorrow for
Yes.
for us in States, also I think for entire world.
Yes, that's what I
Right?
was just listening to on the news just now. I mean, everyone seems to be tuning into the American election this year,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're ready.
Probably the not probably, I think definitely the most strongest office in the entire world, and it affects world in many ways. I mean, the decisions uh, taken by people and then by president will
Yes.
have effect on everything, starting from people to environment, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to tell yourself, well, it's just one person, how much can they do? But I think we've seen very much how much one person can do in the last 4 years.
Yeah,
Just how much difference one person can cause.
that's how you get to know importance of each and every vote, I guess. Right?
Yes.
You have to take
Yes.
politics very seriously. Sometimes people say that I'm not interested in politics, and that's such a wrong statement
I
because it
know.
affects each and every person.
Yes. Yeah, I really am you struggle with people who say like, "Oh, I don't have time to be involved in politics," or "It doesn't affect me." Like, "Oh, it affects you in every single way."
Yeah.
And like I get that not everyone has time to be a political junkie and into every single candidate and everything, but certainly, I mean, it's worth it to at least spend a few minutes researching the issues and then go vote before an election, because it does affect you in every facet of your life. Everyone should vote for sure.
Yeah, yeah, sure. All right, I'll start with my first question. Why is this election so important to United States and also to the world, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think this is one of those things that can be boiled down to a simple answer. It's such an overarching election, and it's such a extreme difference in the candidates that are on the ballot this year, as everybody knows. And I think that we've really seen what kind of a difference can happen from one very extreme to another very extreme, with Obama trying to get us into the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal and so many other things in America, and Trump immediately reversing all those very important pieces of legislation or government outreach. And so I think, what the U.S. does with via its American presidency and just how overarching that government is, it has so many effects on worldwide welfare and the climate, and it goes on and on. So I think, that it cannot be overstated how important this election is for Americans and for everyone around the world, like you said.
Right. Do you think this presidency, these 4 years, have denigrated US's stature in the world?
Yes,
Mhm.
unfortunately, yeah, which is a really hard thing to kind of come to terms with as an American. Especially so, as somebody who's obviously grown up in the United States and always lived here, even though I've traveled a lot, but I've always lived here. you definitely take it for granted, like the standing, in the world that you might have. And when you start to meet other people, you start to realize, like, my American passport kind of means something, how lucky you are to have that and to have access to the world. And, I think it's been said of several other presidents, like, well, you don't need to show me the proof. The handshake of the American president is good enough for me. And that, all of that is completely not true anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely been a situation to make you notice how many things you can lose as a country, and how many things that affects negatively around the world. Not just like, oh, dang, I'm an American, and our standing in the world might be lesser, but because our standing in the world is lesser, other people outside of America will also lose. And those are hard things to sort of contend with, and definitely helps you be motivated to try to change the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Right. The next question I have is, what, according to you, has been the most important issue in this campaign, or during this 4 years and going ahead in 2020?
I think it's hard to pinpoint just one thing, especially because Trump has been so expert at changing the news cycle at every turn. If he's in trouble for one thing, he'll make some noise about another thing. And he knows it might not necessarily be in a good way, but he'll stay in the news cycle and stay at the forefront of everyone's mind. And I think one of the biggest issues for me, and maybe it's true for our generation in general, but I think the climate change impacts are a huge deal. The fact that we immediately completely undermined our Environmental Protection Agency when Trump was elected. We completely dismantled a lot of our government agencies right away, not just the EPA, but also, the CDC and the NIH and so many others. There's just nobody working at a lot of these government agencies. And of course, we rolled back a lot of environmental protection laws, pulled out of the climate accord. So, these things have huge, long-lasting impacts at a very critical time for our planet and for our government. So if I had to say, that would be maybe one of the most important things, but certainly not one of the things that gets the most attention in a news cycle. It's boring for a lot of people. There's a lot of things going on. There's certainly lots of other very important things going on. So, but that's, if I had to pinpoint to one that will be very overarching, I guess that would be my one.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So do you think, have you in your lifetime, or you have known the history of politics in United States, do you think this is probably the most divisive time? I think it is in the world. I can't comment exactly because I don't have that much experience of United States politics, but if I look back at India, definitely this is the most divisive time in the history of post-independent India. Do you think this is the most divisive time, and do you think that Black Lives Matter protests and everything surrounding it will have a significant impact on election results?
Yes to all of those things. So definitely, I think this is the most ideologically divisive time in American history, and that keeps on being represented. If anytime you look at an electoral map, anytime you look at honestly, any election in America going on right now, unless you're in an area which is already very, very Democratic or very, very Republican, it comes down to just slivers of votes in every kind of election, even a city council election. Down in every part of America is very divisive. And if you, look back just a few cycles ago, it really didn't used to be that way. It used to be the entire country really went for a president or the other guy, So this is just an incredibly divided time. And, one thing that I think we as political people in the United States keep asking ourselves is, how do we move forward from this? Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to think of those things that would help you move forward from that. I don't think anybody really has a very good idea. Right. With the rise of, especially with Fox News and then lots of other spin-offs on both sides now, you have Fox News on one side and Breitbart, but you also have CNN and MSNBC, which, yes, they're for the Democrats, but they're also very, very partisan and often present only one side of the story. Yeah. And it really just furthers the problem over and over again.
Right.
And nobody's, doing themselves any favors. The one thing that came out of the 2016 election, which was nice, it was a conversation starter, was that we did talk about the partisanship of our news. And people started to sort of evaluate their news choices a little bit more. But, that also got taken to the point of like, some people would very ardently say, well, I'm only going to watch Fox News because the liberal media is super biased, or vice versa. I'm only going to watch MSNBC because the conservative news is just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so hard to find a way back from this divisiveness that we have now. And definitely the Black Lives Matter movement I don't think anybody expected it to, but it became a huge momentum in especially in 2020. There have been major incidences all 4 years of Trump's presidency, not maybe directly because of him, but you can certainly connect the dots that he might be empowering some white supremacists and people who, through their actions, are making the Black Lives Matter movement become more and more and more prominent. And interestingly, because of the pandemic and the timing, never before has America had the time to protest.
Right.
And sort of voice their opinion like they have now, right? And so even though we're in a mid-pandemic and we're supposed to be quarantining, we also have tens of thousands of people who are freshly out of a job or now work from home who have the time to go voice their opinions, and or who are both frustrated because they're feeling like racially discriminated against and economically discriminated against. And it gives them a lot of, power to get out there and make their voices heard, which I think we're seeing at the ballot box now. I think part of the American election, well, any election, right, any country, is partially organizing people trying to get out the vote and registering voters and doing that, voter education. And part of it is just current events, as we know. And I think George Floyd changed the outcome of a lot of American elections after May. And I guess we'll see if how that momentum is carrying through tomorrow.
I have a subsequent question to this. So racial discrimination was happening prior to 2016 also, right? What is the reason that the protests are getting, or people are more vocal about it right now? Is it just because we have more avenues of expressing our views through social media and several news channels, or it has increased?
I think it's a multifaceted thing. So one part of it, the current president is empowering white supremacists to come out of the closet a little bit more. So people who used to sort of keep their ideas to themselves are now being very vocal about their ideas, which are definitely, nobody would agree that those are good ideas. But it directly impacts the Black Lives Matter movement and any sort of racial justice movements. And then the other part about social media, definitely, people have more opportunity to be heard, but more importantly than that, they have more opportunity to be seen. So only recently do we get to see video of these horrible acts being committed, whether it be by a white supremacist on the street or a law enforcement officer who doesn't have very good ways of handling situations. And we get to see those actual videos of these things happening to people for free, instantly, all around the world, and nobody can control those news sources. And I think that has hugely changed, how certainly Americans, I hope other countries too. Well, after George Floyd, the entire planet protested, which was really surprising to, I think, everyone in America. Anyway, we were shocked. But Black folks can rightfully say that these things have been happening since the beginning, and it's only now that you get to see them. So now there's proof. So I definitely think it's a little bit of column A and column B coming to this moment.
Right. And talking about, the next question would be, so you talked about how the people who are in the government right now, they're trying to suppress some voters, right? They're trying to suppress voter registration. They're trying to, in Texas, that happened, right? Around
it's a big day today.
Yeah, yesterday. And so, the court denied their case, I think yesterday. They were
actually two courts. So this just happened. Yesterday, the Texas Supreme Court threw that court case out, and today a federal court threw that case out. Which was, pleasantly surprising for all of us.
Yeah. So do you think those attempts would be successful, or do you think everything will be fine?
It seems like every case is unique. You know, it's hard to know which ones will just blanket statement success or not. I think and it's generally Republican, so I'm okay with generalizing a little bit here and not being totally fair. But in general, the GOP has been leading efforts to throw out votes, to throw out mail-in ballots, to purge people from voter rolls. In the last, I mean, this is not new, but certainly this cycle and this year leading up to this election has been much, much, much more than usual. Yeah. And it just depends. So we have been, in general, our Texas Supreme Court, as it is not usually very friendly towards, well, what we would consider friendly towards, rights in Texas. But, the Texas governor has tried several different avenues to try to disenfranchise voters, and the Texas Supreme Court has weighed with him on a few things, and then weighed with what, we would consider like us, the social justice, on a few other things. So it seems to be kind of flip-flopping. It's very hard to sort of anticipate what's going to happen. And same thing with our federal courts too. So the Voting Rights Act just stopped being effective in Texas last cycle, which means this is the first time since 1965 that we won't have federal oversight of our elections. And I think, as the whole world probably knows, I mean, because this happens everywhere, but we have very unfairly drawn districts in Texas, just like many other states. And we tried to take.
I'll cut you there. What exactly do you mean when you say that it is unfairly adjoined district?
Sure. Yeah, good question. So in Texas, it's called cracking and packing. So you draw a district line to put as many voters, let's say voters of color, into one district. And that means that like all of the voters of color in one district, while all of the rest of the, let's say 5 districts around it are all white people. Right. So that means that the voters of color are only going to get one representative, while the other 5 districts will be representing white people. So it will even though, let's say that area has like a 50-50 people of color to white people ratio just naturally. So that's a biased way to draw a district. And there are different ways to draw biased districts. You can draw them, poverty levels, way people lean, partisanship. But so we actually had a case go to the Supreme Court, and they threw it out because so Texas was trying to say, hey, our lines are very racially drawn. This is unfair to these communities of color. There's no oversight left in Texas. The state refuses to do anything, and we took it to the Supreme Court, and it got shut down. So it really, like today we had a win in federal court in terms of, in Texas, they're trying to throw out 127,000 ballots, which is 10% of the voting population of Houston, to say that these were filed incorrectly, even though they were filed totally correctly and it was fine. And a federal court threw out the case, which was a very surprising win for everybody and for voters' rights. So it's hard to know. I mean, I think the GOP will keep trying to disenfranchise voters and keep trying to keep people from voicing their opinions. And we just need people to keep fighting against that. And that's the only way you keep winning. You just have to keep fighting.
Right. So the question related to this would be, so what your party, a Democratic Party, doing as a party, as a political party, to bridge the gap between different aspects of lives and different people. I mean, whether you are Democratic or Republican, there is a huge gap. And as a party, what is your focus? Is there any plan of bridging that gap between two sides?
Oh, bridging the ideological divide, you mean?
Yeah, or at least you can come together for something which is very basic, right? Something which is very basic. Like you don't have to think politically about certain issues.
And that's kind of the shame of this year, I think, is that it's very, you would think that you have these things that are common to everybody and everybody can come together over. And in fact, it turned out to be just even more divisive. So, I mean, I would love to tell you that that the Democratic Party is doing a perfect job at trying to bridge that divide and be a big tent party and everything. But I think there's a couple of different reasons why that's so hard. Number one, the Democrats, I think in general, they tend to be kind of elitist, right? They don't always express themselves in lay terms, and they just assume everybody will get it. And if you don't get it, then you're just dumb. This is not every Democrat.
Can I call that symptom intellectual superiority?
Yeah, exactly. And so and this is not everybody, of course. I mean, some people are good communicators, but in general, as a party, we tend to do this. And so we could do better. But there's also the other half of this is that it's not necessarily, presenting a side from the Democrat side and from the Republican side and just saying we should talk about these two things equally is not always correct. Because if you're saying like, well, I think we should view Black people as people, and you're saying, well, I should view Black people as less than people, that's not fair. I mean, there's no point in presenting both sides of that argument. So it's, on the one hand, the Democratic Party should be better communicators, but on the other hand, there should be an intolerance for what is not correct, what shouldn't be tolerated. And it's a hard thing. And so, you would think with this year, with the pandemic, it would have been a very unifying event. If in World War II, everybody had their garden boxes and accepted their rations and took different jobs, and women went to work to make bullet casings, and everyone pulled together, you would think this time, with this pandemic, everyone would pull together and do what they could to limit the spread and all this. But as we know, that is just absolutely not the case, not at all. And certainly that is a big part to do with certain news outlets and how the American president, reacts to it and talks about it. So it's hard to bridge an ideological divide when you feel like your other, the people on the other side of the divide are also Nazis. Like, why bridge that? It's an awkward thing.
I'm not talking about bridging the gap between the politicians or who are far extreme of any ideology, for that matter. But there are people, right? They're just normal people.
Yeah, for sure.
But with this pandemic, you would think that an external enemy would unite people.
You'd think,
right?
Yeah.
Like a war. This pandemic is a kind of external enemy, right?
Yeah.
You can't see it, but it is there. It is affecting everyone. But still, the society is dividing, and it is like the divide is going on and on.
Yeah. It's only deepening.
So that's very interesting. I think maybe the reason also, I don't know. I mean, the thing you said about media, right? You don't have a biased media anymore. You either have far right or far left. I mean, there is no, when I watch news, I think these news channels are no more news channels. These are opinion channels. You don't get news. You just get opinions, right?
Yes.
From one side or the other.
Yeah. And I will tell you, the few news apps that I subscribe to and the few newspapers that I read, I mean, local news tends to be okay. Whatever your local city is putting out, like it has a high chance of being quality journalism. And then the majority of my news apps are actually not American. It might be BBC or Al Jazeera or something, like, because only somebody, I feel like often from the outside, will have a very neutral view of what's going on here.
So another question in my mind is about the transition of power, transfer of power, because the debates and politics around this is very acrimonious. And even Trump suggested in his White House press briefings that he'll have to see whether the transition would be smooth or not, right? And I just heard the news that they are installing temporary fencing outside White House. Do you think that this question would never arise in a democracy, right? But
No.
it's strange times and strange questions. So do you think the
Yeah.
transfer of power would be smooth? But because it was smooth during the last election, it was very smooth,
Yeah.
right? So do
Yeah, it
you
was.
think there'll be any drama around it?
I mean, I definitely think there'll be drama, but it's, you know, and I don't know if I've told you this before, but I think all of my predictions regarding Trump have always been wrong. So I try not to make them anymore. He's such a surprising figure. I mean, who can guess what's next, you know? Oh, wow, I was wrong so many times in 2015 and 2016, just over and over again. But
Okay, let me rephrase this question then.
sure.
So do you think that American legal system is so strong that any person wouldn't have a power to not transfer the power smoothly?
I mean, I think that I hope that the short answer is yes. You know, that
Okay.
there's the only option is that it has to be smooth.
Right.
And unfortunately, I mean, like, it might be by force, which would be awkward and not as smooth as you're hoping, but there will be a transfer of power supported by all three branches of government, and it will just go forward, even if some of the people in the White House don't want to leave.
Right.
And it is an interesting thing. You know, I always, with this question, I wonder if reporters have really empowered the president to this talking point by even asking him that question.
Right.
You know, what if they had just never asked him and it was just assumed and didn't give him the platform to talk about it?
Yeah.
But now, of course, I mean, it's a constant topic of conversation. They talk about it every day, and here we have to talk about it. So here we are.
I mean,
it's
yesterday
an
you
awkward
said
thing.
that the results, the voting should be counted only on the election day and not after that.
Which is so awkward. I mean, quite often we don't have the results on election day. That's not unusual at all. It could take days. You know, as we know in 2000, it took forever, but it might take several days to count all of the ballots, and they should be counted. And I think it's very un-American to assume that we shouldn't count all of the ballots. You know, take the time that we need to do that. But
right. Yeah. The other question I have is, what are some key specific policies of Biden-Harris campaign in this election or in this campaign?
sure.
Policies towards the world and within US also.
So I
Trying to
think
persuade the voters, especially the voters in swing states, which are basically important because, you know, few states will go red, few states will go blue. There is no point. I mean, ideally there is no point spending
not really
your
talking
energy
to
there,
them.
right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
there are 15 states which are important, extremely important, and that would change entire scenario.
Yes, of course. So, you know, I think for the Biden-Harris campaign, I think a lot of their messaging has been, instead of like trying to focus on specific states, you know, oh, Wisconsin or Pennsylvania are producing states, you know, or Florida has a lot of seniors and Cubans, you know, I mean, yes, they are focusing on those specific traits of those states, but I think the campaign in general is focusing on voting blocks. So, and then just assuming that those voting blocks will be in large percentage of the people going to the polls in those states. So a big part of it has been trying to persuade young people. So we have a record youth turnout right now. So I think, I don't know if this is common knowledge for everybody, but America has a pretty low voter turnout in general. We are not very good at participating in elections. And young people the most, right? So older people, seniors, people 65 and older vote. I mean, almost 100% of that demographic votes every time, always. Whereas young people, it can be a really small, depending on what state and what community you're in, it can be, you know, 5%, 10% of the young people who are eligible are voting. And right now, I think we're at 50%. I think in the country is 50% of the young people are participating, which is crazy. I mean, that's an enormous change. And in Texas, we're at least at the 20-25% mark, which is also like a really positive upward change. So I think the Biden-Harris campaign has been, you know, messaging to young people in particular, you know, especially with climate change, certainly with, you know, they've entertained conversations around universal basic income or the fact that the minimum wage is extremely too low in our country compared to, compared to the cost of living. So all of these things will really target young people and their voting. Sorry for all the noise here. I apologize.
No,
Home
no.
Zoom, what are you going to do? And then they're also targeting, I think, some voters of color. So we also have more and more people of color able to vote in our country, and the demographics shift is large. So we're having a lot of places which now white people are the minority. So they're trying to make sure that they're including these voters of color in their conversation. So anything about DACA, which is our young people who were brought here as children, can attain citizenship. Anything about generally attaining citizenship in a way that is not so cumbersome, or deportation. I mean, and how to get healthcare, even if you are a citizen or if you are here temporarily. And then, of course, the healthcare conversation in general for everybody is a huge part of their platform. So I think, with those few points, they are really targeting some different demographics. And then the healthcare conversation as well really targets a lot of seniors too, as we know that healthcare is so important to them.
Yeah. The other question I wanted to ask you is, it's an international question, like it has, but I think it will have implications on US elections. Few things which happened in France in last week.
Yeah.
Because in last few days, when you are about to go to voting, sometimes, these events can change your emotional status, and you can, last few hours, you can vote emotionally, right? And religion plays a very big part in it. Do you think that this will help Trump campaign?
What happened in France?
Yeah, what happened in France? Because what happens generally is, how the rhetoric is, right, with Trump and the Democrats. So Trump, for example, Trump will always say Islamic terrorism, and Democrats would never use that term, or they would never say it's Islamic terrorism, right?
Call it terrorist, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But when you think about it, it's the terrorism which has happened is because wrong impression of your own religion, right? Like what religion tells you, you interpret it in a different way. And so do you think it will have any significant impact? It might.
I think that
Or
I guess
people don't really care about what is happening internationally.
Yeah, I guess that's my short answer actually, is if people are hearing that news, I've heard the news, if people are, but I don't watch all the different news stations, so I don't know what Fox or CNN is playing about it. I would say if you're hearing that news, it's only going to play into whatever kind of a bias you already have, whether it be, that's just a one-off guy and I should be tolerant and he's just crazy, or Islamic terrorists are really frightening to me and I should vote only for the guy who says he's going to kick out all the Muslims. So I have an interview helper, sorry. So I don't think, and I haven't heard it getting a lot of airtime on the few, news channels that I try to tune into. So yes, like international news does get play here, especially with something as high profile as that. Is so awful, but
but I haven't seen Trump in his rallies mention anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. I was like,
I don't exactly remember him. That card.
Yeah, I think everyone is so focused on the election and the domestic issues that it's not really getting any airtime. Mostly he's telling people not to vote by mail or whatever, or that he's not going to step down if he gets unelected. So, I just think he doesn't have time to fit it into his other propaganda speeches. But you're definitely right about the emotional play of voting. I think he's just trying to stick to his message of discrediting the election system, which is unfortunate.
The next question is it's a I think, I don't know, it's not related to election. Why it is so hard to put proper gun laws in place?
So I think a lot of reasons. So in America, we already have so many guns in general. There are more guns than people, and I think that really alters the equation.
Okay.
If you have a country, you know, Australia very famously, you know, kind of like took back all the guns, right? Like melted them all down, passed very strict gun laws. But they didn't have nearly the number like guns per capita that America does. And I don't think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I also don't think it was written into their constitution. So I think we have two really big reasons why it's so hard in America to, you know, work against that. And then the other thing is, you know, in America, it's just a very part of your DNA. You know, you're going to solve your problems and you're going to protect your homestead, not some other guy, you know. And that, so that line of thinking is, this makes it extremely difficult to try to take them away from people, or to pass any stricter gun laws, which is, as we know, a huge shame considering how many gun deaths there are in America. But, you know, interestingly, we have a huge consensus in the country on, you know, universal background checks or prohibiting rapid fire mechanisms on guns. I mean, there's some things that aren't laws right now that everyone agrees on, that aren't being passed. And I think the answer to that question is more of a money and politics question, right? So if the NRA owns the Senate, then you're not going to pass any gun laws. Or similarly, you know, there's a lot, you know, America is, the states have a lot of power within their state legislatures. So same thing. I mean, if the states can't ever, you know, if the legislators are all bought and paid for and they can't pass any gun restrictions, then that's it.
The other non-political question is, when and if vaccine gets available, do you think that government, any government, can have a mandatory vaccine, I mean, the law which says that, or order which says that you have to take vaccine?
I think that's a really interesting question. You know, right now, the only vaccine laws that I'm aware of, and maybe correct me if you've heard of anything else, but the only vaccine laws I'm aware of involve kids going to public schools, right? Like, or even young adults, right? We have to get our meningitis vaccines to go to college, but there's nothing for just adults. And I think I would be very hard pressed to imagine in America where they would submit themselves to that, considering how freedom-based, you know, America generally is. And I think that's also part of the larger question of a lot of things we're going to see legislators trying to legislate, who not only is a hard question for anybody, but it's also a very scientific question too. I mean, what about gene editing technologies or cloning? We have things coming down the pipeline that are very possible that will have to be legislated. There will have to be decisions made. And I think the vaccine question regarding mandatory vaccines for adults is exactly in that same vein. You know, how do you make that decision? I think it'll be very tough.
This is very interesting because coming from a country where if government tells you something to do, you do it, because government has so much power that you can't do.
Can't not do it.
Not do it. But this is very interesting, and I kind of, you know, when I kind of like this aspect of American culture where you have right to live the way you want, but sometimes it's not right.
Exactly.
And especially when there is an infectious disease, it's not just you who are responsible for your own life. You're responsible for maybe 10 other people's lives, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing with, you know, why machine guns should be outlawed, because it's not just about you. It's about, it could be potentially so many other people. And certainly within an infectious disease, same reason why drunk driving should be illegal, right? So, you know, part of it too, I think, is just takes time. I mean, people were protested against seatbelts and drunk driving laws, but we eventually got to where we are. So it could be just takes a long time. You're absolutely right that great thing about America is the freedom to choose to do things, but when it negatively impacts the people around you, it really should be limited. So, and it's hard for people to draw that line. You're right. Like, I want to feel free, but you also need to not hurt people. So that's, I don't know, hard to explain to some people, I guess.
The other question I wanted to ask you related to polling and what happens with the pollings. And, you know, they always say that we have a silent majority over there. Do you think and I see the polls. These polls were exactly round about the same in 2016. Uh,
Yeah, they're very similar, aren't they? Makes you nervous.
yeah, and the thing drastically changed in one day.
Yeah.
So, just to ask you, so after that debacle
Mm.
for news channels and polling agencies, have they tried to incorporate some new methods wherein you don't go into your echo chamber, but you actually go to each and or maybe different diverse demographics and get the actual sense of what is brewing in underbelly of United States.
Yeah, I think the polling question is really, really important. And I wish I could tell you there's been a magic formula worked out and it's all great, but it's such a difficult thing. Just in general, the science of polling is just hard, especially when we're all kind of harder to contact because we all get contacted so often that we screen ourselves off, most of us don't answer the phone. We don't reply to that millionth text message from a politician. We don't answer the spam email. So it makes it very hard to poll people. That being said, one of the takeaways from the 2016 election was that there just wasn't enough polls. So, in this, I think the state of Wisconsin, they had a total of like 5 polls leading up to the 2016 election, and that's just not enough. So now they're constantly polling. The polling centers have put in a lot more money, a lot more effort to, even if each poll is the same rough sample size, even if you're only getting 450 responses to every poll, they're going to do a lot more of them over and over and over and repeat it, which is, as we know in science, right? If you keep repeating the experiment, the more likely it is to be more correct. Right. So that helps. And definitely who you're asking is really important. So I think one of the big takeaways, I think it was they were oversampling college-educated people in 2016, and now they're trying to get a more diverse, population to respond to polls, try to get an accurate count on who's actually going to vote. So we can hope that it's all giving us improved models, and then the people who take those polls and make suggestions based off of them, I think, have improved their modeling, but that's just a mathematical side of it, and how many polls that they take into account and which ones they trust and all that. And that being said, the other thing is too, is that our voting demographic, like we talked about, is just changing. So they, even if you're conducting the same polls as 2016, we just have different people responding to them and different people going to the polls to vote. So that's going to inherently sort of skew what, hey, I think this should be changing because I've altered my sample set, but it's not changing. But it could be just because so many more people are participating that from different demographics. So, they say often the only poll that matters is on election night. So we'll just have to see tomorrow what the real data was.
Yeah. So this gets me to the final question, which is when do we expect final results to come? Like, will it be like 2016 where you get all the results Wednesday morning, or it will take around, some people are saying that it will take 2 or 3 days, maybe Friday.
I don't know about you. In 2016, I think I went to bed with a glass of vodka after Florida lost, and I didn't need to see any more. But
up until 7 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, no. You're a glutton for punishment.
No, I was new to states, so it was all fun and games for me.
It was just depressing.
Yeah,
I think we all have nightmares of the New York Times election tracker has this little, it looks like a gas gauge thing, and oh man, it kept going red, oh no. Anyway,
one state which was 0.2 or something, I don't know, maybe West Virginia or Pennsylvania, something like that, and it was constantly flipping for most of the time.
What a jerk. One way. Oh gosh. Yeah, I don't know. So, there's a couple of options that could happen tomorrow. A few analysts think that we could have a landslide, which means that for Biden, which means that the results would come quickly and it would be done on Tuesday.
Okay.
Probably the more likely scenario, I'm guessing, is that it will take a little while to tabulate all the votes. And a lot of it actually is the mail-in voting, just because a lot of states, obviously because of the pandemic, a lot of folks have been participating with mail-in ballots, which is very good choice. They should do that, you know, rightfully so. But a lot of states have a law where you can't even start opening the letters to start tabulating or organizing the ballots until election day or election night, which means you could have, you know, 400,000 mail-in ballots in an area that you can't even start counting until the day of, and it's by hand, right? So those things would be what might slow down the results, all those absentee ballots and mail-in ballots, and they deserve to be counted. So we'll have to see, you know, if people, the more that votes were tallied by election machines, either during early voting or on voting day, the faster it'll come. So I hope that we'll have the results by Wednesday, but you know, it could take a couple days. It just depends on how fast, you know, how many people volunteered to go count ballots at the county elections office. You know, those sorts of questions, which I don't know the answers to. So hopefully short, but we'll see.
And the one other question I have, just out of curiosity, why don't US use electronic voting machines? Is there any particular reason behind it?
Well, no, there's not a good reason. There's not a good reason. I can tell you that so as we know, like every state gets to decide its own thing in the United States. So they'll have their own laws. And then in a place like Texas, a lot of, you know, there is some universal like laws within Texas regarding voting, but the counties get to also decide their own thing too. So every county might have a different voting machine system, and the counties or the state or both have to pay to upgrade their voting equipment. So up until 2019, like Tarrant County where I live, which is Fort Worth, they were using like 15 or 20-year-old voting machines, which were electronic, but you did not feel good about using them. You know, it felt like this thing is just going to pick a choice, not because it's malicious, just because it's old and dumb piece of equipment, you know. So, but and it takes millions and millions of dollars to upgrade the equipment in any county. So depends on the budget. It depends on how smart your elections board is. So for us, we just got, and we just the cycle, like this is the second time using it this year. We just got brand new voting machines, which aren't connected to the internet, which is good. Nobody wants your voting machines connected to the internet, but they are electronic. So, you know, you just push the buttons and stuff, and then it prints out a physical paper ballot of your choices, and then you scan that into a different machine. So it's kind of the best of all worlds. So you're not going to have a hanging chad problem or a bubbling in problem or anything. It's going to be a nice, clear, simple ballot, and it'll have a paper record in case something goes wrong. You can recount it. So I hope, I'm really happy with our new voting system we have in my neighborhood. I hope that more counties can adopt it, but everywhere gets to choose its own thing, and then you have to pay to upgrade. So it's just hard.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And we'll see what happens tomorrow.
Yes, well, stay tuned. Let me know if you want to call back and we'll just cry together or something.
Oh yeah, we can definitely do it. All right. Thanks a lot and best of luck for everything, for your research.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.